Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed your dinner. I'd just like to welcome our speaker tonight, Dr. Anil Garba. We're honoured to have him come and join us. Dr. Anil Garba lives in Singapore and has flown over here today to join us. Anil Garba received his PhD in Decision Sciences at Duke University, USA. He's currently the ORPAR Chaired Professor of Risk Management, Professor of Decision Sciences and the Academic Director of the Centre for Decision Making and Risk Analysis at INSEAD. His research interests are in reconciling the rational and behavioural points of view in decision making, risk management and incentive schemes. His papers have appeared in academic journals such as Management Science, Marketing Science, Operations Research and Journal of Risk and Uncertainty, and in popular press such as the Financial Times. He recently co-authored a book with Spiros Makridakis, I hope I got that right, thanks, and Robin Hogarth, titled Dance with Chance, Making Luck Work for You. Wouldn't that be all great if we could make luck work for us? Which was first released in April 2009. He teaches courses such as Uncertainty, Data and Judgment, MBA, Probability and Statistics, and Bayesian Analysis. In addition, he teaches modules related to decision making, risk management and negotiation dynamics in several executive development programs all over the world. And we're honoured to have you join us tonight. On his way up here, I'd have to tell you some of the conversations we had outside awaiting coming into the room. I really wish we could have him speak to us for hours. Some of his research is really interesting and affects what we all do day to day, but unfortunately he's only able to speak to us on one topic tonight. Anil Garba, thank you.
Sorry? Okay. All right, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. What I'm going to do today is, given the time constraint, basically share with you what we see as some of the big, broad challenges in dealing with risk, dealing with uncertainty, making judgments and decisions under those conditions. And this is not just my view. This is basically after looking at research of a very large academic community, professionals, including in the finance industry and in medicine, the conclusions everyone has come to in terms of the challenges that we have to deal with. Let me start by alluding to God, Church of England, and God's work. I'm not going to be bashful. I'm talking about JP Morgan, I'm talking about Goldman Sachs, and the like. I don't know how many of you know this, but in 2002, Church of England lost 400 million pounds in their pensions. In 2009, they lost almost everything. So clearly, some of the priests, when they get old, they're going to go hungry. I don't know what comes to your mind. What's very, very clear to me is that at least some people from the finance industry will surely go to hell. I mean, it is going to happen. Don't mess around with the priests. No novelty in talking about this anymore. You've heard so many stories, you've read so much about it, it's there everywhere. But at the same time, it's important to keep on reminding ourselves of the mind-boggling numbers involved. The estimate for the cost of the current crisis. Huge numbers, enormous destruction of wealth. What's a typical response? Look, this was a black swan event. There's nothing much we could do about it. What's a black swan event? A term made popular by this famous author, Nassim Taleb, who defines a black swan event as an extremely rare event with disproportionately large consequences, and more importantly, an event that no one can even imagine a priori. Now, if I'm asked that was this a black swan event, my answer would be a resounding no. You don't have to be a big data scientist, a big econometrician, a big quant person to figure that out. I'm going to just show you a very small sample of the data. This is the 07 bubble. We're still suffering through it. We have no idea where this is taking us. This is the 66 bubble, suffered through that in the 80s. Before that, the famous 29 bubble, suffered through that in the 30s, and so on. And there are many more examples. Some of the responses, Some of the viewpoints on all this, senior Chinese government official asked at the height of the market in '07, is there something strange going on in the market? And his response was, financial markets are like champagne. If there are no bubbles, no one will drink them. Basically admitting that there is something strange going on, but we don't really know what to do about this. This is Greenspan admitting once again in March '09 that we've never been able to model successfully the transition from euphoria to fear. What will happen by the end of November? Will there again be a huge risk appetite? Will the commodity super cycle begin to come back? What will happen to price of gold? What will happen to S&P 500? Will it reach a new high? We don't really have an idea. It's not from lack of trying, it's not from lack of intelligence, but we've never managed to do that successfully until now. This Dr. Doom, I'm not exaggerating, he's on TV every day. Bloomberg TV, every day he says, look, be careful, another big burst is coming. I don't think he has the capability to predict when that'll happen. He'll just keep on saying it every day until it happens. But he's right in the sense that it's going to happen again. Now, when we look at this, when we look at some of the work going on in this area, once again, what comes to mind is what we call the physics envy in the socioeconomic models, where we mistakenly assume that more sophisticated our models, more mathematically oriented we are, the better control we have over our risk, over the uncertainty, over our judgments, and over our decisions. This actually comes from people who are not very well trained in quantitative methods. The very, very good people know about the fallibility of their models. The problem is we've created these huge armies of disciples who follow these with a blindfold, and it creates a lot of trouble. Now, at the same time, there's pushback from practitioners with whom actually I have a lot of sympathy. So think about a trader who must make some decisions about oil futures, a pension fund which must make some decisions over the next 12 hours, a medical doctor who must take part in some critical surgery, who just simply don't have the luxury to take a step back and think about the problem for 6 days. So here it's Calvin saying, the more you know, the harder it is to take decisive action. Once you become informed, you start seeing complexities and shades of gray. You realize nothing is as clear or simple as it first appears. Ultimately, knowledge is paralyzing. Being a man of action, I can't afford to take that risk. This makes a lot of sense. A lot of sympathy with this. But the point I'm going to push is we just simply have to learn not to repeat the same mistakes again and again and again. So this is one of the big points I'm going to try and push. We've done a lot of work in this area. I'm not talking about myself. NCR is actually quite well known for this. There's been a huge team of people working in this broad area since the 70s. And this is one example of the output we produced in '09, a book called Dance with Chance. And I have it up here to point out my two co-authors. One is Spiros Makridakis. He's probably the most famous person alive today in the field of empirical forecasting. There is not a single work on empirical forecasting that doesn't refer to his work. The other person is Robin Hogarth. He's a cognitive psychologist from University of Chicago, one of the founders of what's now popularly called behavioral decision theory, which is the pillar of many subjects like behavioral finance, behavioral economics, consumer choice, and so on. The origin of this work actually goes back to the late 70s when Spiros was a new young professor at NCR. He had just been trained in statistical forecasting from NYU in New York, trained in all the state-of-the-art quantitative methods, came to NCR, and through interaction with the business community in forums like this, through consulting experiences, he was a bit surprised to find that people were using very naive models for making forecasts. So he took it upon himself to convince people to use more sophisticated models. How do you do that? Did a series of forecasting competitions where different models were used to make different predictions anywhere from 6 months to 2 years ahead, and these predictions were compared with actual outcomes, just like your forecasting competition today. Instead of people, models were used to make predictions. When he did that, to his horror, he found that simple models actually did much better than complex models. So at first, academics accused him that, look, you're not using our models correctly, and so on. He did a series of such studies, all the way up to year 2000, inviting some of the best in the world to do the forecasting themselves. This included some of the most well-known economists, central bankers, consultants, people from the oil industry, chemical industry, and so on, and kept on finding exactly the same result again and again. So the bullet points from his work are that complex models can fit the past data well, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll predict the future well. So those of you who have some quantitative background, you know that you don't need anything more than an undergraduate major in math to fit a function to a data series. It is not a complicated thing. You just do it. But it doesn't mean it's going to predict the future well. On the other hand, simple models might not fit the past data as well, but do better than complex models in predicting the future. He also found something which is now very well known, that if you forecast using 2 or more models and then you take the average of those forecasts, that seems to do better than any one model on a consistent basis. But the problem that he still encountered was that although these simple models do well on a relative scale, from a pure prediction power point of view, they're still quite useless. In other words, the prediction power is quite low. Spiros is probably the only professor from NCED who took early retirement at quite a young age. He's become a philosopher, lives on a Greek island, and if you talk to him, his most common phrase is, "What's the point?" So, now, if you see all this, a natural question that should come to our mind is the following. Look, if all this stuff is not working, maybe we should find ways to leverage human judgment better. After all, people have a lot of contextual knowledge, they have adaptive learning, they're smart. So why don't we find ways to draw out knowledge from people in better ways? And this is an area which has been immensely popular over the last 3 to 4 decades. The tradition started by Kahneman and Tversky, but has become immensely popular. A very, very large community is working in this area. And the main news until now is unfortunately still not very good. And the main finding is that independent of context, gender, nationality, training, culture, age, profession, if we have to make judgments and decisions, especially under risk and uncertainty, independent of our context, we all tend to make the same systematic mistakes again and again. In other words, like the title of this recently published book says, we tend to be predictably irrational. Now, let me give you one very concrete example of this. I'm going to draw you to the most famous work in modern economic theory, A General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, done by Keynes in the 1930s. This is the Bible for economists. If you're a central banker, if you're a big shot at JP Morgan, if you're a big guy or big person at Goldman Sachs, you've got to know this work inside out. You have to. You cannot become big without that. Among other things, in this work, Keynes talked about how do individuals react to fluctuations in the equity market. So, CLF goes up by 8% one day, drops by 4% the next day, is up 1.5% the next day, then is flat. What do? It had a high of 100 about a year ago, it's now trading at 20. Should we buy that? What happened to oil? What happened to the Japanese market? In thinking about this, Keynes drew an analogy with a beauty contest that was run by a London newspaper at that time. So what this newspaper would do is, I'm going to simplify it, publish hundreds of photographs of women, ask readers to pick the most beautiful face. All the people then who pick the most popular choice were then involved in a lottery for a big prize. So something like this, I give you 6 faces, I ask you who's the most pretty, each one of you picks a face, then all of you who pick the most popular choice would then be involved in a lottery for a big prize. Now, the most naive strategy in something like this would be to pick the face that you think is the most beautiful. Some other sophisticated entrants in the game will try to speculate what other people are thinking about the most beautiful face to maximize your chances of being in the lottery. Some others, like hedge funds, will try to think, what is the average opinion of the average opinion of the average opinion on each of these faces? How many levels of thinking should you take it to? 2, 3, 4, and so on. This is a problem which has fascinated economists for 6 to 7 decades, and they've given quite a few Nobel Prizes in this area. I'll share with you the current rational Nobel Prize winning solution to this game. And to illustrate that, let me introduce a simpler version of this game, which I would encourage you to play with your colleagues. For example, in this room, I could ask each one of you to think of a number between 0 and 100. I would collect all the numbers, and I'll calculate the average. I would then take 2/3 of that average. Individually, whoever's closest to that gets a prize. Given the time constraints, I can't do this, but if I played this game, I can tell you what the winning number would be. This is a game we have played in almost all the major financial centers of the world over the last 5 to 6 years. Boston, Chicago, New York, Copenhagen, Paris, London, Hong Kong, Singapore, Sydney, places in India, China, and so on. Wherever we play this game, in a room full of people, about 40 people or more, the winning number is almost always between 22 and 28, and more than 95% of the time is arbitrarily close to 24. What's the big deal? Why is that interesting? Why is that remarkable? Take a step back and think about it as a hardcore economist. You have an undergraduate major in math, you went to University of Chicago, you did a master's in economics, you have photographs shaking hands with 5 Nobel Prize winning economists. You learned game theory, you did a double major in math, and so on. How are you going to think about this? Everyone's guessing a number between 0 and 100. You have no other information. In the absence of any other information, what is a good estimate for an average? 50 is at least as good as any other estimate. You take 2/3 of 50, that's 33. But these models will tell you, wait a minute, you're surrounded by rational agents, everyone is thinking of that step, so to stay ahead, you must take 2/3 of 33, which is 22. But these models tell you, wait a minute, everyone is thinking of that too. So to take 2/3 of 22 and so on, so the hyper-rational answer to this game is 0. This is a smart result. Backward induction deserves a Nobel Prize and all that kind of stuff. But to the best of our knowledge, 0 has never won in this game, not even once. So it tells us 2 things. First thing, not interesting, it's not a deep insight, it's not my insight. All it says is many of these rational models don't predict actual behavior. We've known this for decades, not just in context of the financial markets, medical decisions, policy decisions, personal decisions, and so on. This is not interesting. The second part is more interesting, that while these rational models don't predict actual behavior, what we end up seeing in the real world is not always completely random and ad hoc. It's quite a systematic deviation from these rational predictions. Meaning that we have to start taking into account some of the psychology and the sociology of people in addition to the rational models to move ahead. Otherwise, we've reached a dead end. We can't turn University of Chicago into a religion that it's either math or it's either psychology. You have to draw the best wisdom from both to try and move ahead. That's the other point we really try to push. And when it comes to that, one of the biggest issues we have to deal with is what we call illusion of control. The world is not as simple as I'm going to make it out to be here, but for ease of exposition, think of an environment where outcome depends on your ability and your effort. You work harder, you get more, you're more able, you get more. Contrast that with an environment where outcome depends on pure chance. Casino, roulette wheel being an extreme example. It doesn't matter how able or how hard you work, you have no influence over the outcome. And then we make some assumptions. It is rare that we make correct assumptions. When things depend on our ability and effort, we assume for the most part they depend on chance. Psychologists would call that fatalism. The opposite psychological state of this is what we call illusion of control, when things actually depend on chance, but we assume, no, they depend on our ability. Now, if you think about human beings in evolutionary terms, we've had to strike a balance between these 2 opposing psychological states. And as human beings, there's one thing we don't like, and that's fatalism, for a good reason. If we hadn't avoided that over our evolution, we wouldn't have made all the progress that we have made in mastering our environment. Science, technology, medicine, economic prosperity, space, travel, and so on. However, we take this adaptation too far. Even when the stakes are very high, we keep on falling into this trap of illusion of control. What's the big deal about it? What this means is we underestimate the role of chance. We underestimate uncertainty consistently. Our risk management is all messed up, even when the stakes are very high. And the counterpoint to this is if we realize there are things we don't control, the things we can attribute to chance, and we don't try and control what we can't control anyway, you can actually have more beneficial outcomes. This sounds a little bit high-flying, up in the air. Let me ground it with some real-life examples. We've done a lot of work in this area in 4 fields: medicine, finance, business, management, and in the field of happiness. I'm going to show you some quick examples from the first 2, medicine and finance, because these are 2 of the things which people actually think about a lot. These 2 things consistently come up in people's wishes for their lives. Let me start with medicine. Just a quick, how many of you do annual health checkups? There must be more than just 2-3 of you. This is not my data. We worked on this with medical doctors, with some of the best institutes, medicine institutes in the world. Now, we are still grappling with this. I used to be a hypochondriac, so that was my interest in this area. As we see more and more data, we don't know how to frame it. Good news or bad news. It seems for the most part, unprovoked annual health checkups are completely useless. Which way? Let's focus on the developed world, because the developing world has confounding issues of sanitation, hygiene, water, and so on. So you go to a doctor in Melbourne, in Sydney, in Tokyo, in New York, in Chicago, unprovoked. Doctor, check me out. I'm getting old. I'm getting middle-aged. Is there something wrong with me? What is the doctor going to do? Doctor is going to first focus primarily on 8 major risk factors. He's going to tell you, look, control your cholesterol, don't let it get above 200, there's some magical ratios. Control your blood pressure, keep it to 120/80, preferably a bit lower. Don't get too fat, eat fruits and vegetables, exercise regularly, don't smoke, don't drink, and don't work in coal mines. Work in an office somewhere. You're 45 years old. Your cholesterol is 233, your blood pressure is 130/90 on 3 consecutive occasions, you're slightly overweight, you don't really like green apples, you don't like the treadmill, you're a social smoker and you like your glass of wine with dinner. Chances are you're going to be on all kinds of supplements. Now, Harvard Institute of Public Health, which is one of the most famous institutes in this area, did what is called a meta-analysis. And they took decades of studies in this area, put them all together, and they found that these 8 major risk factors, taken together, explain only about 20% of the variation in life expectancy. 80% is completely unexplained. We have no idea why some people live longer, why some people live less. Another way to interpret this is you eat 4 green apples a day, you exercise 6 times a week, you take blood pressure medicine, cholesterol-lowering medicine, you try not to get out of a room because a bus could hit you. Maybe on an average you live 4 years longer. Now, my Greek co-author, who is about now 70 years old, is obsessed with this data. He looks at the variance, he looks at the side effects. Question he's asking is, to live 6 months longer, do I want to give up sex for the rest of my life? This came out actually after we had published our book, which showed that the number of deaths from prostate cancer was higher for men screened with PSA than for unscreened men. This test actually has been removed from annual health checkups in most of the major cities in the developed world, with a very strong recommendation that you should not do this test unless there's a strong reason or strong symptoms, because these tests are not specific to cancer, leading to massive problems of overdiagnosis and overtreatment. Forget the small font, I'll just read out the first line, came in a newspaper in May last year in Singapore. People who want to live to 100 should not worry about their lifestyle, because whether you do or do not is likely to be determined by your genes, according to a longevity expert. They're going to an extreme. But in a way, what they're trying to convey is there's lots of uncertainty, we don't understand it well. United States, top-ranking medical journals, they made a big splash about obesity, published numbers everywhere, announced them, 400,000 people die every year because of obesity. Those of you who know the US well, you can imagine what the reaction would be to something like this. There was all sorts of noises, this is discrimination, you're against fat people, human rights, you can't say this. So they changed the numbers in 2005. They said, sorry, it's 26,000. In 2006, they said there is no difference. In 2007, they said fit obese people live a bit longer. You can't keep on changing stories like this. This is when Victoria Beckham was pregnant in London, opted for a cesarean. Tabloids went crazy, asking whether she's too posh to push. But if you look at Italy versus Sweden, look at the number of births by cesarean section in Italy versus Sweden, more than twice the rate. Look at the infant mortality, more than twice the rate. The point is not that you shouldn't do a cesarean. The point is this is yet another example where we overestimate our degree of control over a natural process. This is a hard message to give. It's not that medicine is not useful. We've done some amazing things in medicine, some invasive heart treatments, antibiotics, lots of other treatments which have saved millions and millions of lives over the last 1 century. But at the same time, just think, it should not be very difficult for you to imagine the simultaneous rise of trillion-dollar industries around supplements and treatments which have no proven impact whatsoever, either on the quality or the longevity of our health. For example, if you have a torn meniscus, it's a knee problem because of sports or old age, there's a very common surgery in outpatient. You go to the hospital at 9 in the morning, they make a keyhole, go inside, smoothen your meniscus, send you home by 10. Takes maybe a month to recover. It's a $1 billion industry in almost all the major cities. Completely useless. Has no impact, and I could show you data, but believe me, if you're interested, read on the internet about this before you go for that. Focus is evidence-based medicine. So let me push this point in a different context, just to give you the generality of this. United States markets, Dow Jones 1987 to 2000. I live on the Upper East Side in a penthouse. I'm a banker. I look at this, late evening, I go to my apartment, draw the curtains, put on classical music, I open very expensive single malt whiskey, I sit in front of my Bloomberg terminal, I look at this and I think, I can see it, I know what's going on. So what do? I write a book called Dow 36,000. I take the data and I extrapolate it. What happens to me? I get invited to Davos. My books sell at train stations, airports, I'm on Bloomberg, I write on FT, I'm making millions of dollars. A person in Midtown is watching me and saying, this is not fair, writes Dow 40,000. Same year. Same thing happens to this person, a third person thinking, how can I leapfrog these two, go straight to Dow 100,000. Now, this is the kind of nonsense you see all the time. You've got to be very, very careful about these. Now, it is surprising, this audience knows this, but it is amazing how many people in the West have completely forgotten about this. That just at the tail end of 80s, the Japanese market was close to 40,000, and more than 20 years later, it's less than 1/3 of its peak. Not a single person in the world predicted this, not one. And it is amazing how people have forgotten about this. This is just a reflection of the uncertainty that we face. Published in 2005, very famous book, said why real estate in California can never ever go down, and we all know what happened there. This is the classic example of cost of illusion of control. Very well-known data, many versions of it. This has been examined, torn apart by thousands and thousands of people. This is not a debate. And that's why I'm first showing you this. This is period from 1984 to 2002, but you can take any other time window. The first bar is the passive. Suppose you put your money in an S&P 500 tracking fund. Some simple index low-fee fund, you make 13% per year. The next bar is the average return for an active fund manager in the US equity domain. It's the third bar which governments and policymakers are very worried about. And this is the big source of debate, 3% per year. Look at the huge opportunity loss over that time period. This is not surprising, because these are retail investors in mutual funds. They tend to consistently buy high and sell low. It's 06, 07, markets are booming ahead, they're afraid of being left behind, they buy into these funds. It's 08, 09, everything is dropping, they sell. And on top of that, they pay average of 3% per year. So by giving up control, you actually have more beneficial outcome. Not interesting, very well-known, old topic. Let's make this argument more sophisticated. Let's go to the heart of what some of the financial industry does, what they're really proud of, and one of that is asset allocation, optimal portfolio. What should I do now for the next 12 months? What about next? I have a 5-year time horizon. What do I do now? Should I give up on emerging markets? What will happen to China? Will Japan really come back? And US, is it overblown now? And Europe, finally, where will it end? How do I do it? How do I allocate my assets? These are the 14 most well-known theories we know of, invented by humankind. Use some of the most sophisticated mathematics we have come up with. At least 5 of these have won Nobel Prizes. I go to Singapore, I open a hedge fund, I say, look, I am doing a value-weighted market portfolio, and I also do base time with short sale constraints. I'm an MIT computer science graduate. I have a huge team. We're really impressed. Here's 300,000, try it for 6 months, then we'll give you some more money. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take each one of these 14 theories and pit it against what I call a farmer's rule, or peasant rule, or a naive rule, a simply 1/n rule. I live in Indonesia, I have no access to mathematics, I've never heard of Excel. I have 10 asset classes available to me in my market, I have $100,000, I'm going to put 10,000 in each of the 10. real estate, emerging markets, commodities, large cap, small cap, and so on. Once a year, I'll rebalance. I'll sell what's gone up to buy into what's gone down and do nothing else. No complications, simple paper, pencil. In my market, the asset classes that are available to me, you look at the 7 most developed financial markets in the world, 1963 onwards, not only none of these 14 theories consistently outperform the 1 over n rule, 1 over n rule often does the best. This is very, very depressing. Now, the point is like medicine, not that you should use the 1 over n rule, it's just that sometimes people go absolutely crazy with the assumptions and the lack of knowledge about the fallibility of their models. Now, there are many other examples, and all of them point to a low predictability in the socioeconomic domains. So let's try and understand that. Why is that? Is it because we are stupid? Answer is no. Is it because we don't try enough or we don't put in enough resources? Answer is no. It's because of illusion of control we consistently, as human beings, underestimate the complexity of the phenomena at play. We can show this mathematically with theorems and so on, but in our book, we wanted to spread this message far and wide, so we came up with a story and to explain this issue intuitively. We didn't want to stereotype nationalities, but we had to pick one, so we picked the Swiss German, because all 3 of us co-authors on the book have lots of Swiss German friends, and we dedicated to our dearest friend called Klaus. Now imagine Klaus, he's an investment banker, lives on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. He's a complete control freak, doesn't like any surprises in his life. Everything has to be very well planned. Takes the subway every day to go from home to office. He took some courses in IO, in some operations research. He doesn't want to reach too early, doesn't want to reach too late. Starts noting down in a book the amount of time it takes him to go from home to office. Does it for 40 days, gets very excited when he looks at the data, because the data is very well behaved, looks like this nice bell-shaped curve, or a cousin of it like he learned in a business school, and he can make some very precise predictions. I'll reach my office on an average in 45 minutes, 90% of the time between 40 and 50 minutes, and so on. He's planning to take his family for vacation to Phuket in Thailand. Starts planning 10 months in advance. He heard in a conversation that Singapore Airline is one of the safest, books into that airline 8 months before time, and starts calling them up 6 months before departure, insisting that he and his entire family be allocated seats on top of the wings. Because he remembered reading in an article that in case of a crash landing, that's somewhat safer. So everything is well planned, they reach Phuket, they land safely, takes the whole family for elephant rides, makes everyone wear helmets, including his 2-year-old son. One morning, family is sleeping, he's walking on the beach, sun is beaming down on him. He gets worried, he's going to get skin cancer. Sits under a tree to put some lotion on his body, and when he's doing that, a big coconut falls on his head and he dies. And the point we're trying to kind of pull out is that there are 2 broad classes of uncertainty. One is what we call subway uncertainty, which is easy to model and quantify. What will be the demand for water in Melbourne 3 months from now on a Saturday between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m.? We can actually pin it down. It is not a complicated problem. What will be the demand for electricity? Say 6 months from now on a Sunday between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. we can pin it down. It's not a complicated problem. But then on the other hand, you have another class of uncertainty, which we call coconut uncertainty, which is difficult, if not impossible, to model. Will there be another financial bubble or an asset bubble in the financial markets in the next 5 years, which will create some predefined level of chaos? Answer is almost surely yes. When, where, in which form, it's a problem we cannot model. Will there be another earthquake stronger than 7 on the Richter scale in the next 12 months? We expect about 14 of those. When, where, to what intensity, we just cannot do it. And unfortunately, most real-life situations are a mixture of the two. They have a subway component, they have a coconut component. So when we use a model, what do we capture? We capture the subway uncertainty. Coconut remain uncaptured. When we make judgments, what do we capture? We capture the subway uncertainty. Coconut uncertainty remains uncaptured because it's just more difficult to think about. Just to make a quick illustration of this, last few examples. This is Klaus, time to go from home to office, well-behaved data, you can make very precise predictions. JP Morgan, we've lost 2 billion. Sorry, it's 3 billion. Sorry, it's 6 billion. Hey, what's going? You don't understand. This was an exotic instrument embedded in a very exotic trading strategy. You guys are illiterate. Come on. It's for people who don't understand these things, who don't understand the terms. You basically make a call, you call heads, it comes tails. The regulatory agencies have the right to go and check that they're not doing this on a systematic basis. People should be allowed to risk their own money. Of course, it's free markets. This is not about socialism or communism. It's their own money. Everyone should be allowed to do that. But it should not be that the wrong coin tosses should be covered by the taxpayers. So in that sense, they have a right. Value at risk models, sophisticated cousins of this. You all know what this is. Okay. Look at history. This is what happens. I look at the past 200 days. No, I'm more rigorous. I look at the past 600 days. Then I can say with probability 0.99, I will not lose more than this on a given day at a given position. Let's take the most commonly used value at risk model, pit it against real data as compiled by one of the most famous mathematicians ever in the history of humankind, who computed that daily movements of more than looking at the period 1916 to 2003, keeping out by intentionally some of the most turbulent period in the history of the financial markets out of the picture. Model would predict that daily movements of more than 3 to 4% should have happened only on 58 days. It's happened more than 1,000 times. Daily movements of more than 4 to 5% should have happened on 6 days in that time period, happened 366 times. Daily movements of 7% or more should have happened once in 300,000 years. It's happened 48 times. These are not black swan events, which by definition have to be very rare. Look at the huge discrepancies. 58 versus 1,000, 6 versus 366. This is a clear example of coconuts constantly falling on our heads, but we're just sweeping them under the rug. So this is, if you look at financial markets, earthquake, price of oil, life expectancy, success of a business, happiness, they all are a mixture of the two. And these are the issues. These are the big, broad, overarching challenges. And how are we dealing with these? Basically, this illusion of control leads to lots of heuristics, leads to lots of issues. Let me just come to that. In 3 broad buckets. One is this cognitive biases. So you make forecasts today. Each one of you has made forecasts on 10 different quantities. What we can show in this forecast, in each of the cases, that they're subject to anchoring, availability, overconfidence, and confirmation biases, and many things of that kind. Other bucket of issue is around greed, fear, and hope. As we saw in 06, as we see in 08, we saw in year 2000. And the third bucket is about not learning from experience. So stemming from illusion of control, it creates problems in these 3 buckets, and we're doing very precise work, not just myself, a huge community in these areas. Trying to do what? What we know is models have limits. Doesn't mean they're completely useless. You use models to capture subway uncertainty, but you have to augment the uncertainty further by using subjective judgments. But we get subjective judgments from all of you, like today. How do you increase the reliability of that? One way to do it is by aggregation. Use the median, as you saw. But are there better ways? And those are kind of the issues we are working on. So I will stop here and leave some time for questions. Thank you. Yes, please.
My question is, why do you think there is this continuing anchoring on the normal distribution?
Because it's very tractable, very easy to use. That's actually, normal distribution is indeed quite common in real life. There's one of the most famous results in probability theories is the central limit theorem, which shows that many quantities in real life will tend to be normally distributed. But that doesn't mean in each and every situation. So we know, for example, in the financial markets, it doesn't hold. The tails are much fatter and longer. and accounting for that becomes an issue. But for things like, if you calculate, if you plot the weight of each and every person, the shoe size of each and every person, men and women combined, the height, it'll be bell-shaped. It'll be normally distributed. So it is indeed quite common in real life, but it doesn't mean you use it blindly, and especially when the stakes are high. So in the financial industry, we know that the tails are very uneven, asymmetric, fat, and we have to basically learn to account for those.
Are we really loud? It's very easy.
Yeah.
Let's take, for instance, anchoring bias. Ben Bernanke is a PhD in the Great Depression, so would you say that his theories are based on an anchoring bias for what he's doing with QE, for instance?
Actually, in my opinion, I think he's done a remarkable job. So that's not really anchoring in the sense that we are lucky. Actually, we had a person who was very familiar with the possibilities of different outcomes. And hence, took it very seriously, accounting for this and that. Now, whether the QE, has he gone overboard and so on, there are mixed feelings about it. And to be honest, this is my personal view, that there was no option, but at the same time, they don't know how to get out of it. And that's going to require a lot of creativity and resilience and firepower for emergencies. So that's going to be the big issue. I think it was the right thing to do. Otherwise, we didn't know where we were going. But getting out of it is going to be a big, big issue.
Rob Fowler from Hester. Thank you for your presentation, simply because nothing else that reinforced my own prejudices. Why do you think so many people who have not actually created the back-tested solutions actually accept those solutions which are purely based on quantitative back-testing?
Why do they accept those solutions?
Yeah. When they shouldn't have the anchorage bias of actually having done the work themselves.
Yeah, you see, this is a very strong classical example of illusion of control. That we know what is happening. So, you see, if I'm Bill Gross, I make a call. It goes wrong. What do I say? I look at the long run. I don't look at the short-term stuff. If I get it right, what do I say? I can see it. So, and I'm picking on him, poor guy, I mean it in more general. When we make a judgment, things come right, we attribute it to a skill. We make a judgment, things go wrong, we attribute it to bad luck. This is very, very strong in human beings. And all this has a positive side to it. All these biases, we are hardwired like this because of survival skill. But as a result, we don't learn. Because we attribute good outcomes to good skills, bad outcomes to bad luck. This is the only reason why casinos continue to exist in business. And this is the big issue, exactly with the back test. If it works, we'll say, look, it is a model, it's a good skill. If it doesn't work, there was some exogenous factor. And this is a big issue. And this we understand very, very well now. This illusion of control in human beings is very, very strong. So in other words, see, the message, often when we talk about it, people say, look, in a way what you're saying is don't ever cross the street because a bus could hit you. We're not saying that. We're not saying don't take risk. We're not saying don't take action. We're not saying don't cross the street. You have to cross the street. There's no choice. But don't intentionally put a blindfold on yourself while crossing a street. It exponentially creates the chances of an accident. So take risks, but take it knowingly. And the one consistent message, if you talk to social scientists, what is the most central result in social sciences over the last 40 years? Unanimously, with a strong voice, you will get overconfidence. What do people mean by overconfidence? That we underestimate the extent of uncertainty. Our low guesses are too high, high guesses are too low. This is something you can very, very easily check, extensively documented. We have worked on this for 5 years with the financial industry. This is easily one of the biggest issues facing management of risk and uncertainty, underestimation of uncertainty, and it's natural. Like I talked about, we are able to grapple with the subway uncertainty. We are very good with our models, and we can capture it really well. But we've been ignoring the coconut uncertainty time and again.
Hi, I'm Olivia from JP Morgan. On that
I was
basis,
joking.
after your comments,
I
I have a question about medicine.
I knew you guys
So-
were here, that's why I exaggerated a
My
bit.
question is about medicine on that basis. So, financial companies take on board what you say and employ PhDs and bright people to try and address the problem because it helps us and our clients to make money. Your observation on medicine were fascinating, but truly depressing. How do you get them taken on board by the drug companies and healthcare to move things forward?
How to, sorry, the last part?
Your points about medicine, how do you get in a different industry those things to action change because it's
Yeah.
terrifying?
You see, so I think financial industry actually is lagging behind a bit. Some of the smartest people work in the financial industry. Okay? Because the stakes are high, the compensation is good, it draws very, very smart people. But I think something happened in the 70s where basically we got enamored by the technical wizardry. And in some sense, and I come from a very strong quantitative background with similar experiences. So I was invited by many, many financial institutions to work. Basically what you're doing is you're force-fitting solutions to problems rather than thinking about the problem and finding the solution. So this is going away rapidly because the people are very, very smart. They tried this and think of it as an experiment, just like communism was an experiment. They thought they could model it. So rational equilibrium, general equilibrium, all this became kind of religion. It was like a temple. Religions evolve, and this has to go away. So I think people are smarter. The point is, you see, the point is not that these rational models are useless. They've provided some very useful insights, but you got to combine this with the best wisdom from other traditions. So if you think about decision-making judgments, there are two broad ways of doing it. One is how should people make decisions and judgments, which is the rational mathematics, economics, statistics tradition. The other big tradition is how do people actually make judgments, which is psychology, sociology. The trick is not to pit one against the other, but to draw the best wisdom from both and then come up with useful rules of thumbs and heuristics that people can actually use in real life. Don't use a heat diffusion equation from physics to try and chart out some prices of options. It's silly. You're force-fitting a solution to a problem. Yes. It is. Sorry, go ahead.
It's starting to cause me some concern because they're very confident about your models' outcomes, and yet what you're telling me is that I should actually not trust models to some extent.
No, I'm not giving you any model, right? Okay. First of all, it's not supposed to be a pessimistic message. So think about this. Price of oil. Actually, I don't have that slide here. I recently saw that there was a full-page article on the prediction of price of oil for 2030. And do you know what the prediction was? $200 per barrel, whatever the number. Think about this. 200, 2030, would you bet for it? Could it be 40? Could it be 289? My question is, to which human being, in which form is that forecast of any help? It's completely useless. Okay. So in a given situation, you have an amount of uncertainty. We are actually very good with our models to capture the subway uncertainty. We are very good at mathematics, statistics, all kinds of models. But remember, whatever uncertainty that model gives us, with a very high probability, that's an underestimation of the uncertainty. So you get this uncertainty from the model, you have to augment it. How much more should you augment that? The only way we know of doing that right now is to use subjective judgments, which should overlay the model. The question then is, what is the best way to bring in subjective judgments? Should we just ask Bill Gross? Should we ask the expert on China? Should we ask the leading expert on oil? And answer is no. You get subjective opinions, and you try and use the wisdom of crowds in an appropriate manner. So it's not a precise model, but it's more about the framework. And how do you keep independence? This is now an extensively developed area. How do you maintain independence? How do you bring in these subjective opinions? How do you maintain the robustness and reliability of those to augment what you're getting from the model? So it's not that models are useless. They're very, very useful, but as a starting point.
Can I indulge with my own?
Sure.
The examples that you gave us today really are about health, wealth, and happiness, things that we know drive us as human beings, right? So is it the fact that our human emotion is making the outcomes irrational that's driving most of the examples that you're talking about today? Although that said, I know people get pretty emotional about the subway, so I don't know if that quite fits. But I'm just curious as to how much you've sort of thought about the emotional side and whether we're driving these irrational outcomes. If we were a bit more like Spock, we might be okay with our emotions.
No, so my view on that is, that's part of being human. Okay, and if we didn't have emotions, we wouldn't be human beings. Now, emotions have a good side to them. If we didn't have hope, if we didn't have greed, we didn't have fear, we wouldn't have made much of the progress that we would have made. But at the same time, we have to also make sure that we tame these things in a reasonable way when the stakes are very high. Now, I'll give you a few examples of these. I unfortunately didn't have the time today to get into some of the details. I can mention a few examples. Let me start one from each bucket. Let me take this. You gave subjective opinions, and I was talking, I think, to you, I think, before the thing. We did this test with a brokerage house, including their offices in New York, London, Tokyo, and Singapore, and Hong Kong. So these guys were predicting on a regular basis Dow, gold, and oil. Among other things, these were the common quantities these guys were predicting. So we asked them, give us your best estimate 12 months from now. They gave us some numbers. Then we asked each one of them, can you think of 2 reasons why your estimate might be too high? Can you think of 2 reasons why your estimate might be too low? We had no interest in these answers. They gave us all kinds of weird stuff. We were more interested in the follow-up question, so what's your second best forecast? And what do we find? The accuracy of the second best forecast was much, much higher than the accuracy of the first best forecast. And the reason is because when we come up with subjective opinions, we are subject to all these biases, anchoring, availability, overconfidence. We only look for information that will confirm the opinion we already have and rationalize away everything else. If we think China is going to drop by 20% by December, we're only going to look at information that will confirm that opinion. Anything contrary to that, we will just rationalize it away. So through these questions, we just force people to kind of think about it again and again. So these are the specific examples. Now, in emotional barriers, the biggest one is about loss aversion. I'm sure you all know about this. And this is actually being used by many hedge funds. It creates arbitrage opportunities. This is people leave money on the table. And I could show you that example. Do I have time to show that? No. It's a bit technical. But the point is that there are very, very specific examples in each of these buckets, heavily documented, not with experiments, but with field observations in the financial industry. and solutions are being developed there. So the point is, use models to capture the subway uncertainty, overlay that with subjective judgments, but then you have to increase the reliability of subjective judgments. Two ways to do that. First, get rid of these biases in individual subjective judgments. We have specific solutions. As a further step, leverage groups. But to leverage groups, you need independence. So then the question is, how do you manage that independence in groups? You do that, then you will immediately see an improvement in the quality of your judgments about risk and uncertainty. That's very nicely documented with real data.
Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today.
Thank you.
Enjoyed that. Looking forward to going back to the office with our investment team meeting on Friday and saying, oh, well, we've got to run this simple beauty contest and follow that up with trying to explain the coconut uncertainty to my colleagues. So, but, we really enjoyed having you speak here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You could all join me. Thank you. Thanks again. If you could all now take those principles, I'm sure some of you, like myself, have already filled out your forecasting sheets, and go back and maybe ask yourself those 2 questions of each of your predictions, scrub it out and start again. Look, really, what we'll be doing is we'll be coming around to collect those forecasts at about 9:30, so if you could finish it by then, that'd be great. And we look forward to seeing you all at our first CFA Institute conference in Melbourne on the 24th of October. Thank you.